What is up, Batman fans? Welcome back to my channel. Rachel! If you haven't seen the Batman, there will be spoilers in this video, but in today's video, part 1 of 2, I want to tell you 5 villains I would like to see in the Batman, the sequel. Subtitle, I don't know what it's going to be. Now, the obvious choices here are either the return of Riddler, teaming him up with the Joker, we saw that nice relationship they had in Arkham, or going the Penguin route, but those are characters we've seen, and even if we get the Joker at some point in the next movie, I want to give you 5 more choices. 5 villains that I love from the comics, whether that be the way they interact with Batman, the design of their characters. Now, I don't want to get into fan casting just yet because I am redoing my Batman villains fan casting video that I put out a few years back, so we're not mentioning that right now. I want to get into the villains, and let's start with number 5, the one that I feel should be least likely, but I'd still like to see in this universe. I love the character of Hush. Austin, why is Hush so low? Well, first of all, he's a newer Batman villain. I think we've only seen a couple of representations of him in the animated universe. Early 2000s, that's around when his origin started. And while I enjoyed the animated movie that we saw him in, I felt that things were rushed and we could get a better version of that character on the big screen. Austin, who is Hush? He's a friend of Bruce Wayne's as a child, and he played a part in his parents' death in hopes of somehow being a part or gaining their inheritance, so his entire motivations are fueled by greed and his hatred for the Waynes. Now, the Batman had a reference to Hush. The Batman also had a villain in Riddler that had a very similar origin to what we know from Hush in the comic books, and clearly this version of Riddler had hatred for the Waynes, Bruce Wayne. So I'm not entirely sure if I'd like to see a retread of that type of character, even though this would clearly be going a different route. That's why it's so low on the list, but Hush is an interesting villain for sure. My next choice, I'm kind of cheating here and going the Batman and Robin route. Austin, what do you mean? Well, I'm pairing Bane with Poison Ivy, and of course, we don't want to do that same storyline, but these two characters, it almost feels like it's magic when they're paired together, but obviously, you have to do something different from the movie that we got in the late 90s. Now, The Long Halloween is obviously a story that they pulled from in the first film, but they didn't go full on into that story, so you can continue to take those elements, and Poison Ivy's character, working for the mob, seducing, brainwashing the character of Bruce Wayne in that story, attempting to take down his reputation. I think that is the perfect kind of character to continue in the path that the Riddler set, but with that, I feel like you need some brawn in this situation. In the first film, we got Batman versus a bunch of members of the mob and some gang members around town. I need Batman to take on somebody strong. And that's why I think it would be cool to bring in, it's hard for me not to reveal who I'd like to play Bane, but someone of that magnitude to fight Batman in the midst of being taken down by Poison Ivy. Again, I'm not just pairing them up because we saw them in a movie together. I'm putting them together because I really wanted to include both of them on this list, and I feel like it would work extremely well if both played a part in this story. You also have to look at that moment where Batman takes what looks to be an EpiPen of sorts and injects himself, and the common fan theory is, well, that's clearly a precursor to the Bane venom, and if that is indeed the case, well, we could see Bane in this universe sooner rather than later, but a more comic book accurate Bane. Less of what we got in The Dark Knight Rises, which I love, but you want to make him as outlandish as possible in this grounded universe. I think that would work. Andrea Beaumont. Recognize the name? Well, if you're a fan of Batman Mask of the Phantasm, I said this in my Batman ranking video, I want to see this character and this story adapted to the live-action world. Now, maybe they don't go down the specific path that they went with the character of Bruce Wayne, because I feel like he needs to be Batman just a bit longer for that. And clearly, you'd have to change this story up just a bit since we aren't further along in his path as Batman. He's still kind of learning how to be the Batman, but take the idea of the Phantasm, do that same exact storyline with the Phantasm slowly taking people out in Gotham, and bring in the Joker, Barry Coogan's Joker, who we established in the first film as that version of the antagonist character that we see in that movie. A comic book adaptation is one thing, but adapting one of the greatest animated superhero movies of all time is another that a lot of people would take issue with, so you're going to have to change the story just a bit. And this is kind of an outlandish theory, that's why it's not number 2 or 1, so I don't think it's ever going to happen, but I personally think it would be Really cool. Next up, the Court of Owls. Now, I've seen people like on my Twitter feed say, Austin, these are boring villains. Well, they've done it justice countless times in the comic books and the Batman animated film Batman vs. Robin, which I thought the Court of Owls played a really interesting part in. Now, is there going to be a Robin in this film? Probably not, but the Court of Owls is just that type of character or group of characters that feels like this Illuminati-ish type of group. And in the first movie, you establish this conspiracy with all of Gotham, so it would only make sense for them to go that route. And we've already hit on the elites in Gotham. Well, these guys, they wear owl masks, and they are the Gotham City elites who have become more and more disturbed by what the Batman's doing around the city. So then they send out the Talons, who are these assassins, and attempt to destroy Batman in numerous interesting ways in the comic books, but doing it in a more grounded way in this movie I think would be great, and that group of assassins would be the perfect way for Batman to show us a bit more action, which is what people were wanting from the first film. So I love the idea of the Court of Owls. I think they should absolutely do it. Now, before we get to number one, I want to throw out two interesting honorable mentions. The first one is Clayface, a tragic story that feels a little bit too outlandish for this universe, but if anyone can do it, it's Matt Reeves, kind of fitting it into the Batman lore that we know. The next one is Scarecrow. Now, you may say, Austin, we just saw Scarecrow 17 years ago, and that's a long time. We have since seen the Arkham video games kind of not rebrand, but almost make the character of Scarecrow even scarier, even crazier, and I'd like to see that version of the Scarecrow in this universe. But all of those, in my opinion, pale in comparison to the villain that I want to see the most and have been wanting to see for quite some time, and I cannot wait to reveal my fan cast for this. It's Mr. Freeze, the Sub-Zero storyline specifically, again, referencing Batman the Animated Series and the movie that we got regarding Mr. Freeze and his wife and his attempt to save his wife's life. Now, we got a little bit of that in Batman and Robin, and I don't even want to touch that. I don't want to get near it with a 10-foot pole. Quarantine me. Don't ever let me touch it. But that concept with his wife is a concept that could play so beautifully into the motivations of a villain. Mr. Freeze is also a ruthless villain. He's not Arnold shouting out one-liners. He is so ruthless, but also meticulous and smart. He's a brilliant man who uses those powers for evil instead of good. It almost reminds me of Dr. Octopus in Spider-Man, and we saw what Alfred Molina was able to do with that character. Now, my only thing is fitting the concept of his powers into this live-action world in this Batman universe. A freeze ray? It does seem a bit over the top, but if Matt Reeves is able to take that concept, and he's mentioned before in numerous interviews that the character of Mr. Freeze interests him, something tells me we're going to see this character sooner rather than later in live action. Maybe it's not even in this universe, but to see that version of Mr. Freeze, someone who is a bit more prepared than the versions we've seen in live action in the past, that's the version I want to see, and that's the storyline, the route that I would love to go down. Now, would that work better if Batman had a Robin or, had a partner in crime? I guess he's got one in Commissioner Gordon, sure, but I feel like it would be the perfect next step in this trilogy of Batman movies. But it's a larger universe. We have TV shows on HBO Max, and this was just my way of getting my ideas for a Batman sequel out there, the characters that I would love to hit on and see come to life. Now, again, I will have another part in this series of videos, fan casting some of these characters, but I need you all down below. Who is your fan cast? Promise I won't steal anybody's idea, and if I do, I'll give you credit. But also, which villain did I not mention that you'd like to see? Is there someone that I'm not thinking of that's so obvious, saying to yourself, Austin, come on. Now, will we most likely get the Joker as the villain? Probably, possibly, but it would be cool if they went down these routes as well. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching. Appreciate it big time. I'll see you soon.